No man is going to tell us we don't have a say in what equality rights looks like. Yeah. And so if you're angry, do something about it. Don't let it fester. Go do something about it and you might win. Yeah. That's the extraordinary thing. You just might win.
Much has been written in journals, papers, and books by a significant group of academics and authors about feminism and the equality movement. And there's a growing inventory of productions about women in Canadian life. We want to add more. The Women's History Project is a nonprofit organization launched in 2022. Our ambition is to promote and showcase women in Canadian history. We want trailblazers, leaders, authors, and historians to tell stories about women in the labor movement, at work, in the media, women who took to the streets, equal pay, maternity benefits, the right to have your own bank account. We want to get women who are still living to recount their challenges and campaigns. History is rich with stories about advocates, activists, and women in public life at the community, provincial, and national levels, across Canada, in small towns, on farms, in urban areas, women who have used their voice to make a difference. This is 1,000 Voices, 1,000 Stories. The Honourable Nancy Ruth, United Church minister, feminist, activist, and an equality rights and charter advocate. Many will agree she's Canada's first feminist philanthropist. In the early years, the extraordinary Nancy Ruth co-founded LEAF, the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, in 1985, following the implementation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Court Challenges Program. In 1986, she co-founded the Canadian Women's Foundation. As a senator, Nancy Ruth advocated for sex, age, and disability to be added to the criminal code provisions on hate propaganda. She also helped to improve gender-based analysis for federal policies and programs. Following her retirement in 2018, she championed for the gender-neutral language in the national anthem, a huge campaign. She created Nancy's Own Foundation and continues to support organizations such as the Feminist Archives at the University of Ottawa. Her biography, The Unconventional Nancy Ruth, was published in May 2021. In this episode, Nancy Ruth has been interviewed by Komal Minhas. Komal is an entrepreneur, investor, host, interviewer, and champion of women.
I'm very excited to be here with you today, Nancy Ruth. I, on the way here, was listening to a podcast or interview that you did over the pandemic, and I got an even deeper understanding of not just how robust your history is, but also how funny you are. So yeah. I'm so looking forward to us diving in even further today. But I'd like to start a little bit at the beginning. What are some of the earliest sort of inspirations or memories that you have that allowed you to become the feminist that you are today and to have gotten into this realm of activism?
Well, I was born into a family that was politically active and had great roots in the Protestant tradition. And so those two always weave together, religion and politics, in my family life. And I was the youngest of 4 children, the only girl. I had 3 older brothers, and they got stuff I didn't get, and I didn't like that. So I didn't think it was fair. So I resented my father doling out the goodies to the boys and me not getting it. I mean, I got other things like a pretty dress or something like that, when really what I wanted was to have a gun and I don't know, shoot tin cans as we used to do back in the day. So that's how I began. And then at some point, there were 2 sets of kids really in my family, an older set, and then myself and my youngest brother. And I saw my old man push my mother down the stairs one day, and that upset me. There was yelling. I'd heard yelling before. I'd seen bruises on my mother's body before, and she'd always say, well, I walked into a chair or a table or whatever, and I never understood what this was. But when I was 16 and I saw that happen, I decided I was going to spend my life making sure violence against women didn't go on. And that's what motivated me when I was a kid, and that's what I started to do.
And it's those formative memories are so strong. I also grew up in a home that had an abusive environment, and I know that it really formed so much of my ethos of what was right and wrong, and what I would stand for, the level of integrity, that level of self-respect as well. And so when you carry that forward into policy development or a gender-based analysis like you were a huge champion of, how did that lead into really tactical policy change that you were a part of?
I'm not quite sure how to answer the question. I guess GBA was one of those fantasies we had, gender-based analysis, that it would make a difference if people would do it. But we needed to measure how would people do it, and we didn't know how to measure it. So one of my favorite stories is meeting Sheila Fraser, who was then Auditor General, in an elevator in one of the Senate buildings. And I said to her, would you ever do an audit, a GBA audit of government departments? She had a twinkle in her eye. It was simply marvelous. She said, well, I'll take it to my staff. I don't think they'll be very happy about changing plans midstream, but I'd consider it. And I went, wow, woo, this would be fabulous if this happened. So I had to set it up. She knew I was on the Senate Finance Committee, and she was about to appear, as the Auditor Generals do from time to time. So I set up my colleague, Grant Mitchell, to ask her the questions. I knew if I asked the questions, the committee would devalue it. Such was my reputation. So Grant asked the questions about would her department do a GBA audit, and she outlined for us the 5 steps that needed to happen before she and her department could do it. And one of them included a tabling in the House of Commons of a request to do it. So I got the Status of Women Committee to do that, and I helped engineer all the other things that were required at that time to push this along. And since then, there's been an audit every 5 years, and the Auditor General never commit to saying they'll do it in the next 5 years. And I just wish the opposition would use the information a little more critically than they do. Mm-hmm. The reports are there, and the deputy ministers should pay attention to them and improve things for women, but it doesn't happen certainly as quickly as I had hoped. Mm-hmm. But anyhow, it's an example of...
The first office that I worked in when I moved to Ottawa was Senator Grant Mitchell's office.
Oh!
So I love that part of the story. When I was hearing about it, it brought it full circle for me as an Albertan. But when you shared about your mother earlier, she was a big force in your life. Can you share a little bit about how she led your activism forward, or was even more of an inspiration or support in your work?
I think both my parents had pretty equal influences on me. My mother had worked for a group called the Student Christian Movement, which during the 20s and 30s was very active in terms of left-wing politics and so on. I remember I'm told that in our subdivision in Toronto, the only vote for the communist candidate was my mother's. So I grew up with a conservative father, a liberal grandfather, and a mother who was quite a bit on the left. So you can see why the marriage wasn't as commodious as it might have been. Anyhow, Mother dealt with social changes, like the poor children should have the right to education. So she did things like start the first childcare sort of kindergarten for poor kids in downtown Toronto. Our church was in downtown Toronto. But she didn't particularly deal with systemic issues. And I guess that's one of the big differences between my mother and I. If you can't get at the root causes and change them, then the violence continues and continues and continues.
And in that support of root causes, how did that lead you to want to entering politics? Because you had 2 runs prior to becoming a senator where you were actually trying to be an elected official. And you have this quote where it's like, if I can't litigate as a lawyer, I will legislate as a politician. So can you share a little bit about that inspiration to run for office?
Well, I was the 3rd generation of my family who had run. 2 of my brothers had run before me, and I had attempted to run for a federal nomination in 1988. And I guess the decision to run, came from one former attorney general saying to me, shut up, go and do something about it, like run. And the other thing is I had to deal with myself, my tendency to want to push people aside, to do whatever. Politics is a cooperative sport. It may be a blood sport, but you have to follow caucus. and you get to say what you want in caucus. But once caucus has made a decision, you have to shut up, no matter what you think or feel. And I had to come to decide that I was willing to do that. And I guess that's when I decided to run.
And what advice would you have for women or young folks who are looking to enter politics? I know that for you too, in that second time that you ran, your opposition said that they were going to out you. And you got ahead of it and you said, I'll just out myself. That's something that today, if you were to ask young people if they were to enter, like that would stop them in their tracks from doing it. But your courage and that tenacity, you just went for it and spoke your truth and shared your truth with the country.
I don't think it took a lot of courage.
Okay, tell
It
me more
was
about that.
going to happen.
Yeah.
So I needed to control it.
Yeah.
So whatever the message is, the best of your ability, control it. I mean, I couldn't deal nowadays with social media.
Yeah.
And I don't know what advice to give young people, but run. Good people do run. It's a difficult place to be in. There's pressure to change your values to what the party wants, and it may not suit you, but you still, if you're playing that game, if you want them to support you on some issue, you're going to have to support them on things you don't like. Mm-hmm. And that's just part of the game. But if good people don't go in and have a measure of moral fiber and guts, don't go.
I know there's a lot of folks who are on that edge, especially these days. So it's really helpful to hear just that galvanizing of like, go and do it and make sure from someone who did it.
And never do things alone.
Yes.
Keep a group at home that will keep you centered, because you move into a culture that's foreign and it's sometimes hostile. And write down a list of why you ran for Parliament, wherever the legislature, Parliament is, or City Council. And keep referring to that list, because it will slip away with all the other pressures coming in. And keep a group of your friends close to you who said, but you said this and you do think this. And because you need that balance. You need to be balanced against the power of the parliaments.
And what was that group of friends for you? Who were some of those people who kept you grounded and sort of centered in?
Well, those were people, when I moved to Toronto at the end of the 70s, they were the people that I worked with on the constitutional issue in 1980-81.
And those people, when you found them, what did that feel like for you? Was it sort of
home?
Home, you said.
Well, there's a prior story. I had been a minister in the United Church of Canada, and they had decided to fire me. Not just me, there were 11 of us they put out, and we were
Was there a specific reason?
Yes, none of us were working in congregations. Some of them were hospital chaplains or social workers, or I was doing organizational development with NGOs and some church groups. I was also doing clown ministry at the time. However, we all got booted out of the Toronto Presbytery. I don't like being kicked around. I had 3 older brothers. I was familiar with what it felt like. And my tendency was to say, And besides, this was supposed to be the community of love. So what was happening? I just got a registered letter in the mail saying, bye-bye, so long, God bless you, thanks. No way. So I went to hire a lawyer and learned that if the lawyer was not also a minister in the United Church of Canada, you couldn't retain them. This is nonsense. If the lawyer's really good, why would they be in the ministry? So anyhow, I hired a lawyer, and he taught me about things like natural justice and so on, and having your day in court. And so I learned all the arguments, and we went to the Judicial Committee of the United Church of Canada, and we won. And we were all reinstated, and I caused a change in the rule book that any lawyer would do. But the nice story about it was how I met Bertha Wilson. Yeah. And Bertha Wilson became the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada, and she was head of the Judicial Committee. And then when NAC, the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, had made some medals to commemorate, 50th anniversary of Persons Day or something, they had always saved one for the first woman who would be presented to the court as the first woman judge. And Bertha Wilson got it, and I got to be there when that happened. And that was kind of special in my life because it sort of turned a circle. Anyhow, what my fight with the United Church did was that it taught me that the law had some importance. So when Pierre Elliott Trudeau was bringing back the British North America Act and creating the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it was important to me that the law include women and women's equality. And so that was the link of how I got into the law business, so to speak, which led to the legislature, running for Parliament and the Senate.
And that community of women that you met through that, you said before the constitutional work of 8081, you met this group of women, or these...
No, during it. They were part of the group I worked with, and they're still my best friends.
Yeah. I'd love to speak or hear about that, because I feel like as feminists or as activists, we really do need that core group around you to not just remind you of who you are, but to know that you're doing this work with people who are making substantive change. So maybe for some of our listeners, it might be helpful to hear what some of these women went on to do alongside you. So we hear this about...
You mean after the charter fight?
After the charter fight.
81?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. There was Mary Eberts, who was the senior feminist constitutional lawyer. There were organizers like me that helped organize LEAF. Mary Lou McPhedran, who's now a senator, was also organized. There were six things we had to do after that conference. And I'm not sure I can remember them all, but here goes. One, we need to do research on what a litigation fund for women would look like. So a group went down to the United States, Beth Symes, Beth Atchison, Mary Eberts, and somebody else. We had to educate the Canadian public, the women in the Canadian public, that what this charter could mean. So we designed a group called the Charter of Rights Coalition, which I ran. It coordinated a lot of 18 national women's groups. And we, in those days you created slide tape shows and, did speaking tours across the country to tell them what the charter meant and the kind of cases they could take and bring and use the charter for. So that's two things. Third thing was we needed a group of lawyers to revise statutes, look at the statutes on the books and the regulations and see what needed to be changed in light of this equality clause in the charter. Beth Atchison ran that group. We also needed lobby groups in each province to demand the changes. There was a moratorium on the equality clause for 3 years, and the purpose of it was to allow legislatures and parliament to change the laws, make them equal for women. I mean, it was not simply change the name of manhole covers to sewer covers, but that's what happened. Yeah. So anyhow, we created these lobby groups. The group doing the research on the statutes would feed the lobby groups in the provinces with the information they needed on which laws needed to be changed, and then they would go to their local politicians and hammer away at it. The fifth thing was to have authorities, to write authorities. If you go to court, you got to have authorities, right? So we got all the academics together who were supporting the charter, and had them and publish them in distinguished law journals. So when the first case came 3 years later, taken by LEAF, there were all these authorities by these distinguished academics. Nobody knew we'd organized the whole thing. And the sixth thing, of course, was the creation of the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, which did the litigation.
Which is LEAF.
Which is LEAF.
Which is LEAF. So all of that organizing in the context of, because some of our listeners might be younger, no internet. A lot of this is done asynchronously, and just this level of activism and this level of coordination is just so fascinating to hear about, because we get overwhelmed sometimes with just, we have hyper communication now, but this level of organization, of implementation is so immense. And so when you look back at it and assess sort of how well this all ended up working out, how does that feel for you at this stage in your life as well, to say we really did that?
I guess I don't think about it that way, tell you the truth. We had phones and we had fax machines. Yeah. I mean, the fax machines were that terrible paper that was shiny.
That you pull off on the side.
Yeah, that now you can't read at all. So, and like I said, we did a slide tape show. I mean, it was. That's just what you did. That was...
And a slide tape show, so this cross-country sort of movement?
Yeah, we sent it out to we had these 18 national women's groups who were part of the Charter of Rights Coalition, and they were distributed through their networks to all their branches. So there were, once a month, these groups met in whatever town they were in, from little towns to big cities, several groups.
Yeah.
So they would be shown, and sometimes there'd be a local lawyer brought in or someone else who understood what the charter was about. They'd go in and speak to the slide tape show.
Yeah. And so with this in mind, we've been talking around the charter itself to sort of really round out this portion of the conversation. Can you share what the outcomes ended up being of your mobilizing and why that needed to happen? Because women weren't being considered in the language around the charter or in the charter in that way at that time, if I'm not mistaken. And that was what led to the activism prior to.
Well, you'd have to look at the history of LEAF and the cases it took and the ones it lost and the ones it won. Mulrooney gave LEAF a tax-deductible charitable number, which was a great benefit to us. There were early cases like we pushed for longer maternity leave. We pushed to stop workplace harassment. Like women would find in a soap factory carved penises stuck on their desk, especially if they were racialized women. There were all these things going on, and LEAF took cases against that. They had a series of Aboriginal First Nations cases. You'd have to look at the website. I mean, I don't want to rely on my memory here.
No, I mean, your memory is immense, and that's why it's so helpful to hear.
Well, there was things like the Schachter case on parenting, expanding parenting leave, and who got it. Were you going to call it maternity leave, or were you going to call it parenting leave? The issue isn't alive right now. I mean, men and women get parenting leave, but in the days when that case was taken, it was seen that mothers bear the children. Mothers have postpartum depression. It's the mothers that feed the baby. So the leave should be for women. So.
Yeah. And I think it's really helpful to hear because so much of my generation, we grew up with a lot of this in place already, where we didn't have to think twice about it. So to know that this was something that was lobbied for, that there was, very well organized activism around to do substantive policy change is something that is the reason why we have the...
And sometimes it kicks you back in the teeth. Like the change when you get divorced, men did not have to necessarily provide a living for their spouse. So there were changes in the law around that. And of course, now that women are earning, and sometimes more than their husbands, they have to pay back to the guys. So things happen that you didn't anticipate.
Yes, absolutely. So there's been also a lot of philanthropy that you have contributed to over the years, to schools, to churches in different capacities, to the Feminist archives. So can you tell us a little bit more about what your sort of dream is for this initiative specifically and other initiatives that you've supported that are closest to your heart?
There's less than 10% of charitable dollars goes to women and girls in Canada. That is the best statistic we can find. I actually think it's lower. But anyhow, that'll do for public consumption. Why? Why is this? If you look at the federal budget or provincial budgets, you'll see some similar kind of statistic in there. Why are women not getting their fair share? Girls in sports, there's all this discussion in Canada now on women's sports teams being paid the same as men's sports teams, and so on and forth. Billie Jean King.
Billie Jean King and the new hockey league for women. I am on the wait list for tickets. I'm so excited.
All right. So, I mean, this all comes out of, equal pay for work of equal value. And, well, you just have to keep working. Look, if you've got some extra dollars in your pocket, it's fine to give it to universities or hospitals or disease research. All those things are important too. But give 50% to the work of women and girls. That's all I'm asking. I'm going to ask for more too. Anyhow.
Well, but we'll start. That's a starting point.
Yeah. Everything needs to be done, but you don't do it on the backs of oppressing the largest group in Canadian society or world society. You don't do it. So.
Yes. And in this realm of work, you've been an outspoken person across the board. Part of your reputation is being very direct. I'm just going to tell you how it is. Can you tell us some examples of where that really worked in your favor, and then maybe a couple where you may have done things a little differently?
Well, it worked with Sheila Fraser, that's for sure. If I hadn't asked, I wouldn't have got.
Yes.
And that's the truth of it. Where has it not worked?
And the outcome with Sheila Fraser, just for our listeners, so that they...
Oh, I had asked Sheila Fraser to have the Auditor General's Department do a gender-based analysis of government departments. And every 5 years since then, the Auditor General has been doing an audit, usually of 5 departments at a time, and coming up with results which, on the whole, say you're not doing it.
Yeah.
So that's what that was about. I'm not sure I can answer the second half of your question.
With this, us being in the Feminist archives, what would you want young folks to make sure that they learned about our history, especially when it comes to the progress of women in Canada?
So I'm not sure we learn from history, but if you don't record, there's an absence of knowledge, and there needs not to be an absence. But I have given the archives $1 million along with Shirley Greenberg, and I think we both want to say, hey, we lived, we did something, pay attention. I don't know that anybody but a few academics doing their doctoral theses will, but maybe they will. I mean, I remember going into a boys' school in Toronto and giving the kids these were teenagers, a page of paper and asking them to write down what they knew about their fathers and their grandfathers, and they were writing away. And after that, I had them turn the paper over, and I said, well, write down what you know about your mothers and your grandmothers. Silence. They knew hardly anything. So this Women's Archives is an attempt to fill that and to help kids understand that women do contribute. We just don't cook and clean. We make the world run. We run the refugee camps, too. I mean,
Yeah.
Don't get me started.
That's the point. We need us to get started.
Yeah.
When you think of your career, your life, what is an achievement that you're most proud of, or an accomplishment in this work that you're most proud of?
Well, I don't think there's one. I mean, my sense of being an activist is twofold for me. One, I was born into a family that had wealth, and therefore I had wealth to use, and I was able to do that. The second part is that I worked in community with other women to accomplish things. So I think any kind of activism is both two-pronged, what you do by yourself, whether it's giving a toonie to someone on the street, or whether you join a group to change whatever issue you're concerned about. And I think that's very important.
What would be something you'd want to pass the torch on specifically?
Oh, activism. Be active. But, it's easier for people are activists in different ways. I'm an extrovert, so I don't mind getting out there and blabbing around. But there are people who are introverts who do a lot of thinking and help people like me. So everybody's needed. Everybody's needed.
Because our listeners may not know the full history of your contributions to the Charter, could you walk us through that story and that journey, just so we can also have that for them to know about?
Well, there are other people who can tell the beginnings of it better than me, such as Linda Nye or Mary Lou McFedrin. There was a group I only know about Toronto.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it wasn't happening in other places, so that's why I'm concerned about sharing the story, because it's only partial. Yeah. Women for Political Action. Trudeau decided to do this charter thing. Lloyd Axworthy was the minister responsible for women. Doris Anderson was president of the Canadian Advisory Council on the Status of Women, which, yeah. Lucy Pepin was the vice president. Anyhow, Doris had hired lawyers like Mary Eberts to go to the Victoria Conference in 1979 to look at the issue of women's rights in planning this charter. So the Advisory Council had some legal data in which they wanted to hold a conference to bring women together to discuss how we should be represented in the equality section of the Charter of Rights or other sections. Well, the minister responsible said, you can't do that.
And who is the minister responsible?
Lloyd Axworthy. And Doris Anderson resigned. And there was a great uproar. What do you mean women can't talk? You do this to us? So 1,300 women marched on Ottawa. So how did those 1,300 get there? This is the story you need Pat Hacker for. Linda Nye called 13 of us, or I don't know how many there were, to a restaurant in Toronto called the Cow Cafe, and we sat down, we talked about it and said, yes, we have to do something about it. We decided to do it 3 weeks later on February the 14th, 1981, on Valentine's Day. And, oh my God, who's going to Ottawa? Who can organize there? Who can organize here, there, and everywhere? So Mary Lou had some contract work in Ottawa, so she was flying back and forth, so she did that bit. And somebody knew this woman called Pat Hacker who ran a women's sort of counseling service here, and she knew lots of women in the civil service, in various MPs' office or thereabouts. And anyhow, it all got organized. I mean, it was in some ways so disorganized that we, I don't know, had something like $7,000 or $17,000 we took in at the gate, and a woman called Isla, I can't remember her last name, from the Oakville area said, well, I'll look after it. And she walked out with all this cash in her hand. Somebody said, who's she? Anybody know who she is? This wasn't the only time this kind of thing happened. Maureen McTeer, I guess, was, Joe Clark must have been leader of the opposition at the time, so they did a reception for us. Marion Dewar let us use City Hall on the Sunday, which is where the idea of, if we get this thing, then what? That's where those 6 things eventually come out of. Then what? What are we going to do? And, well, that's how it happened. When there were 1,300 women just came. There were billets organized, and, people in Ottawa opened their houses, had a spare room or a mattress on the floor, and people, whatever.
Yeah. That's the type of organizing that feels like just so soul-filling and also like change-making simultaneously, where you can tell that the cause was the lived experiences of all these women, and that outcome. Well,
we were pissed off. Yeah. No man is going to tell us we don't have a say in what equality rights looks like. Yeah. And so if you're angry, do something about it. Don't let it fester. Go do something about it, and you might win. Yeah. That's the extraordinary thing. You just might win. And we did.
And what did that win? What was that specific win in this instance?
Well, it's Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and Mary Lou, and I don't know who else she worked with, designed what's called Section 28 of the Charter, which is now under discussion in Quebec on this business of whether you can wear religious dress if you work in the civil service. So.
And so it continues.
And so it continues.
Many, many years since.
Yeah, sure.
And the torch continues to be passed.
Yeah, 42 years, 42 years, yeah.
Just on the personal side of things, because I feel being the first lesbian senator in Canada, that's a big deal. And something that I think, under Paul Martin's government, he brought you into Senate. What was that moment like for you? Obviously, your identity might not have been at the forefront of, the joy of that moment, but it's a big moment in our history to have had you be that person for us all.
I didn't even think about it. It wasn't until that magazine in Winnipeg put in a headline, Canada's first lesbian senator. I thought, holy shit, they're talking about me. I had no idea. It never occurred to me. I'm a women's rights activist. I'm not a gay activist. Mm-hmm. And that's been clear throughout my life. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't an issue.
Yeah. And when you think back to maybe first examples for yourself of, we hear this, you can't be what you can't see. So for you as a woman, what were some of those portrayals in media or politics or in your own personal life that helped you realize, like, I can do and be more, and I'm going to keep trying to push this forward for yourself in your life?
Push what forward? Anything.
Anything, or your passion.
Well, I guess I saw other people being successful at it. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, they can do it. It's like so many women sit in a gallery in the House of Commons, mm-hmm. and they look at the mayhem below them. And they all say, we can do better than that. Yes. So you run. Yeah. I mean, it's really not very hard to come to that conclusion when you look at question period. Yeah. Or anything else, or when people are giving speeches and there are only 10 people in the house or whatever quorum demands. Yeah.
I was 17 when I moved to Ottawa because I loved politics. I remember going to question period and Scott Bryson was on the floor and the Conservative Party all started hissing at him because he has a lisp. And I got so disillusioned in that moment of, I've been putting politics on this pedestal and here they are behaving in a way that we wouldn't even understand.
But it's also because he was seen as a traitor. Yes. Because he was elected as a Conservative and switched parties, so yes. The Conservatives would get him. So
double entendre there. Mm. But we can do it better with the weight of the world on our shoulders. What would you say, or what helped you sort of move through the various pressures you may have felt as a woman and continue to push in such a public way for such substantive change?
I guess I just, I'd phone my friend Beth Atchison, who's a very calming influence on me.
We all need that best friend to call.
And I'd rant and rave and say, do you know what senators, blah, 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 or the caucus did this or whatever. You just have to keep at it. I mean, you get lied to from your own caucus, you're promised this, and then they stab you the next day. I mean, this is just part of the game. And if you can't put steel in your back, you're going to suffer a great deal. So put steel in your back, and this is where your values can slip. You just have to get hard enough to cope with the system. It's not pleasant. Yeah. It can be very tough. I mean, we did the change in the national anthem to All of Us command because I only had 3 years left. We knew it would take that time, and nobody was going to do anything on gender that I proposed. It was clear I wasn't going to get anywhere in my caucus. And so I did something simple. Restore the anthem to the 1908 version. And it was key. I mean, Beth and I chose the word restore because the Prime Minister, who was Stephen Harper, liked restoring things historically. Yes. Not changing, yes. Restoring. Yes. And so we picked the language that would feed into his value system and da-da-da-da-da-da. And then he put it in a throne speech, and all the Legion halls went ape. And I had no warning that it was going to be in the throne speech. So as a result, I couldn't organize to counter the flood of emails they got, so it got pulled and waited until the next government came. But, there were, I think, 10 bills to make that change in the national anthem over a 30-year period. And it happened. I mean, it's made other possible changes coming down the pipe more acceptable, too.
Yes. And so that continued galvanizing for change is something that we need to just, for our listeners.
We need more Julie Black singing at football games.
We do. And speaking in very hard times and with integrity and with the platforms that we have, and to not be afraid of making a fuss, getting people riled up. So in that light, how did you navigate so much backlash? How did it impact you personally, or your psyche, or those inner parts of yourself, and how did you kind of keep your North Star?
You go home and you cry. You put your boots on the next day and go out and keep at it. Keep loyal people around you who are sympathetic to your cause. Don't count on your colleagues. They need to be outside the system.
That's so useful to know. Because sometimes you feel like, oh, these are my friends, but actually they have their own agendas.
Well, in politics they do. That's why they all ran. Yes. They ran because they were angry at something and they wanted to change it. They thought something was unfair, unright, not right. So they ran. That's true, I'm sure, for everybody sitting in a legislature or city council or parliament.
So my final question for you today is, what is giving you most hope right now in terms of women's activism and moving the dial forward and continuing to pass that torch forward?
Well, the fact that 3 of you are sitting here doing this, that's part of it. And women are still active. It does concern me that many women who worked with me during the 80s and 90s are now feeling silenced or too threatened to speak out. And for that group, this is a very, very serious comment because they have something to say. And, you know, what I know from the younger generations, your generation and younger, they're active. They're active. That's good. I don't understand it, but they're active, so that's good.